Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And it's week 4 of Sounding the Shallows. See how well I've learned to say that
You
now. We've had one or two wonderful communications from people, as we often do. And one of the ones I have to say I love most was the recording of a nightingale.
Oh, beautiful.
Accompanied by the steps in the gravel of the person recording it, which I thought was rather interesting. I was remembering when I heard it, it's a wonderful sound. Over a time when I heard a nightingale, or at least I thought I did, and because I wasn't sure it was a nightingale, I wasn't sure whether I should be as ecstatically pleased about it as I was. And after a bit, I thought, you were an idiot. I mean, if it was a nightingale, be pleased. If it wasn't a nightingale, does it really matter?
No.
So,
well,
anyway.
We still have lots of sparrows in our garden, nothing exotic, no nightingales, but we are growing to love them, aren't we?
Yes, we are. They are bandits. But,
They are. They
yeah.
eat all the seed within a couple of hours that we put out. But we also have, and I think we may have mentioned the silly pigeon before. This I think it's a pair of silly pigeons. They've built a nest in the worst possible place, and we keep checking it and hoping it won't fall through a very large crack.
It looks as though it could subside and fall. But I mean, you can't go and chat to a pair of pigeons about the problem with their nest. So we'll keep you posted anyway. Yeah.
Ah, yes, and somebody sent something which I've not heard before, but I thought was really interesting. It's a little story, one of those stories about a monk. And this monk goes to a guru, and this monk is feeling very miserable, and he says, everything's terrible. And the guru says, it will pass, all things pass. Well, a bit later, he goes back to the guru and he says, you know what, everything is wonderful in my life. And the guru says, it will pass, everything passes. And I think it's been that sort of a week for us, hasn't it? Because as well as the nightingale, we've heard some really bad news from people who, I mean, life goes on, doesn't it? It's not just all to do with COVID-19.
Yeah, life, death, and
illness,
bereavement
and,
go on.
And sadnesses as well as the happinesses and the good things. So, it's easy to forget that actually COVID-19 is not what it's all about.
We had one rather odd thing, didn't we? We went to Barnard Castle, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We ventured out.
Boris's friend goes occasionally. And we didn't see him. But we did. An odd thing happened. I'll tell you what it was. They went to get a bacon sandwich and some coffee to bring to the little park on the right as you come into Barnard Castle. And I walked into the park using my sticks, which I have to use now. So as I walked along, there was a thump on the grass behind me, followed by a sound of something heavy rolling towards my heels. Mm-hmm. And I thought, someone's thrown something at me. So I walked onto the seat there because I couldn't stand and turn around until I sat down. So I sat down, turned round, and there was what looked like a hedgehog in the middle of the grass. And I thought, what on earth is that? Quite a large round thing. And when my son came over, he said, no, look, and he pointed up to the top of a monkey puzzle tree. And there were lots of these things, and they were the fruit of the monkey puzzle tree. I suppose they'd be the cones. I don't know. You call them in other things, but it was
huge.
Big and it was heavy, and we've still got it, and it's on our windowsill at the moment. So it's a tiny thing, but it just shows you can never be sure of what's going to happen.
You can never
next.
be sure of what's happened, and there's got to still be a level of fear, hasn't it? A friend of ours was talking about a primary school teacher that she knows well, saying that the children are beginning to go back, the years 1 and the years 6s, and they're all geared up for the kids, and there's all the social distancing required. But the parents at the school gate, because it's so familiar and it's what you do, kind of forgot to be afraid and were all wandering off in a big huddle. So we've got ahead of us some very obvious dangers still, but a lot of unseen ones. I mean, you don't expect when you're going to sit in a park that you're going to be attacked by a cone.
By a pine cone.
No.
It would have fallen on my head. I don't know who'd have won that battle, but I think it might have injured me. It was very, very heavy.
Quite Agatha Christie-ish, really, if it had fallen on your head and people were looking for the culprit.
Who did it?
Who did it? The pine cone.
Yes.
But I suppose we've been thinking, haven't we, about this Sounding the Shallows and what might you find underneath the surface that's invisible until it attacks you.
Yeah.
Well, I
that's
suppose
right.
we were thinking, what do we find? Well, we find rocks. We don't see them until the tide goes out. But the other thing we were thinking about was sinking sands, because we lived for years in Sussex, and there really are quicksands on the Sussex coast,
They're
aren't
very
there? Camber
dangerous ones,
sands.
yeah,
And,
places like Camber. I think, I can't remember now, I guess they had signs and notices and things.
well, I
but,
think they did, but 3-year-olds and dogs don't always read
No,
the
they
signs.
don't,
And I know
no.
one church picnic, we had quite a frightening time with a child who had started to sink, and you remember all the pamphlets you've
That's
read,
right,
and they
yeah,
don't have a
yeah.
lot to do with how you're feeling at the time. Yeah, yeah.
So we are faced now with negotiating apparent safer waters, aren't we?
And it reminded me, because we were talking about this, so Adrian knows what I'm going to say. Some time ago, in fact, a long time ago now, you came up with a way of describing the way of grace that Jesus walked, didn't you? And it was trying to work out a way of putting the fact that he wiggled between things the very best way possible. And you talked about the rock of the law that was impassable. So the lawyers always thought they'd got him because the law was the law and they were going to get him. And then there was the swamp of license, and we all know about that. It's when you kind of start moving into, does it really matter? Nothing really matters. I'm sure it's all right. Everything's kind of okay. And they're waiting for him to do that, aren't they? And he finds this way of grace.
Yeah, and it's really important, and because it's one of the things we say in the church, we talk about the way of grace and we talk about how important grace is, but as usual with the application of these things, God or the Holy Spirit is actually very practical, and so it isn't just a religious exercise. It is how things change. And I'll give you a quick example. We met somebody a long time ago now. Everything in my life seems to have happened a long time ago, doesn't it? But it was a long time ago.
Well, no, not the fur cone, Adrian.
Not the fur cone. No, that was recent. This was a lady who later became a minister. But when she was 15, she belonged to a choir. And her choir was really her church life. It was important to her. And they had a rule in the choir that if you missed three practices, you were out. So she missed one and was devastated, missed two because she didn't want to go back. And then she thought, well, that's it, I've had it. She missed three. So on the evening of the third one, imagine her sitting at home thinking, I've lost my choir.
Yeah.
It's gone. And there was a knock on the door later that evening. And she went to the door, and there stood an elderly member of the congregation. And he looked at her, and she looked at him. And she thought, what's he going to say? Is he going to say, you can't come back, you've had it? Or is he going to say, oh, no, it's all right, you can come back? So, what did he actually say? This is what he said, and it changed her life. He said, because he was a Yorkshireman, he said, we have missed thee. We have missed thee, love. And all it is saying is that you are loved, whatever. And it suggests there is a way to make your way back. And you see this in the Bible as well. The story of the woman taken in adultery, which most of you will know. But perhaps we could unpack that story a bit.
It didn't matter. You see, it didn't matter how long those Pharisees and teachers and people poked their irritable questions at the silent man writing in the dust with his finger. None of that mattered, because I knew I was going to die. I was already trembling with fear, and I knew I wouldn't be strong enough to protect my head for long, and I would just pray to be knocked unconscious and hope to die quickly. But you know what? Thinking of my parents' grief and shame was the worst thing. Actually, it made me want to weep and scream, but I couldn't make a sound. In fact, I almost wished the talking would stop and they'd just get on with it. Well, then, the strange man said something that I couldn't quite hear, And a silence fell, and that was when I screwed my eyes up tight and waited for it to start. But nothing happened. And when I dared to look, everything seemed to be frozen, like a picture. No one spoke or moved for several seconds. And then one of the greybeards turned his back and a stone dropped from his hand and thumped onto the ground. And he just walked quietly away towards the town without looking back. Well, then another, and yet another, stone after stone, landing with little splashes of dust as they went, until only the youngest and noisiest questioners remained, fury and disappointment on their faces, I'll tell you. But even they scratched their heads and stomped off at last, one or two of them throwing their arms up angrily in the air as they went. Well, there was only that man and me left in the end. It was so strange. He looked around for a second as if he was surprised to see no one there, and then he gazed straight into my eyes and he said, "It's gone very quiet. Does not one of that baying pack condemn you?" Well, I gulped like a fish caught in a net. I still had trouble finding my voice, I'll tell you. "No, sir," I managed to whisper at last. "I don't think so, 'cause they've all gone." Well, he did a very peculiar thing then. He lifted one hand and he flicked a tiny little pebble in my direction so it landed just in front of my feet. "Well, in that case," he said, smiling really nicely, "I don't either. You better get home, and you will sort your life out, won't you?" And when he said that, he made me feel as if I could, and as a matter of record, I did. The way of grace, that way between the law, which they thought they were going to catch him out on, didn't they? And just saying, "Don't you worry," and giving that woman and giving so many other people that feeling they could take control of their lives.
And the really important thing, isn't it, is that you are not, that you are never let off.
No.
It's not about being let off. It's about somehow being embraced, the whole thing, what you did, if you did something, what the good in you, the bad in you. And it's very clever.
I was thinking, Adrian, one person who wrote to us this week was talking about the amount of energy that it takes for her to stay still at the moment, for her to not rush with the water.
Actually,
and I was thinking, in a way, that's what sometimes we have to do when we get into danger. It's so easy, isn't it, to get into danger like the sinking sands or the swamp of license, which is the way you described it. And so difficult sometimes to just stop and say, "Whoa, I need to stop. Everything's running away with me. The water's running too fast. The sand is getting too deep."
It easily happens. We had a friend who went through this, somebody who was very happily married to someone we knew, a man, and she used to get the train every morning, if you remember, from their local railway station, 6:30, I think it was, to Charing Cross. And one day she got on the train and she sat opposite a man who she hadn't seen before, and she thought, "He's a good-looking man." Purely
aesthetic.
A critique, So that was that. And the next day, there he was again. And they started to chat. And the next morning, there he was again. And a kind of conversational relationship began. And it kind of grew and grew and grew until she knew that it was not a very good idea.
And she was in danger.
She was in danger.
And
she thought, who can I talk to? Well, of course, you think I'm going to say Jesus, don't you? But actually, she talked to the person she trusted most, which was her husband.
Yeah.
So on Saturday morning, she said, "I've got something to tell you." And he said, because he was like that. And she said, "There's this man on a train." "Well, he's there every morning." "Yes." And I think I'm just getting a bit carried away with, him and me and I don't think it's very safe.
She said she was beginning to look forward to those journeys.
Forward to
didn't
going,
she?
yeah. So there was a pause while he looked at her and she looked at him again, and they waited, and he came round. He put his arm round her shoulders and he said, "Change trains." Change trains. I tell you what, there's always a point where it is still possible to change trains. Beyond that, we're talking about something quite different. But as the sand sinks and you know you've nearly lost your foothold, that is the time to change trains. Jesus said, if your hand offends you, cut it off. And he might have said, if the 6:30 to Charing Cross offends you, cut it off and get the 7 o'clock. He is essentially practical with grace. That is what it does. There is a way that will work.
And there is a decision to make. At that point, isn't there? I remember when you were running the secure unit, there was a boy who used to lose his temper and go completely wild. And there was one time when he was doing that and you were trying to hang on to him where he stopped, didn't he? What did he say?
He stopped in the middle of a wild temper with me trying to control him and said, stopped dead and said, "Sorry about this, Mr. Platt. You know I have to do this, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I think I do understand." And away we went again, struggling again.
But after that, you were able to talk to him about the fact that there was a moment where he could still make a decision.
Yeah, it was a slow learn, but it was possible. Yeah, you're absolutely forgotten about that story. Yeah.
But it is a narrow way, isn't it? And we were talking last week about runaround and about the fact that if anybody remembers it from last week, we're talking about the game runaround and the fact you have your different corners. And there's a great danger if you've run to a corner, there's a question asked and you run to the corner that you think is the right answer. And if you run to a corner when there's nobody there and everybody else has run to a corner, the other corner, immediately you think, I must be wrong.
That's
and then
right,
a bell goes and you're allowed to change corners, and your great danger is you change because everyone else is on that. And the problem with the confident group, and they might be right, I'm not saying they're wrong, but is that they think they're right 100%. And it isn't always the right way for you. You've got to find your narrow way, your way of grace, your way between the rock of the law and the swamp of license, and you've got to stick to it.
Yeah,
and we were talking about images, weren't we? And I was trying to think of an image for what the narrow way. And I thought, what is the very narrowest way? The thing I came up with was a tightrope. I thought, well, you can't get much narrower than that. No. And I thought, well, if you're walking a tightrope, the only way you can keep your balance is to have your arms out wide. And I think that's a pretty good image of the Jesus way, the narrow way, that you walk your own way. You don't look to right or left or you'll fall off it, but you walk with your arms open wide for all the people who are not on your way and
that
love them on the way.
That is not an easy trick, I tell you.
No,
I mean,
that isn't ideal, but then
Jesus
I can't
seemed to
walk
be
a tightrope.
very good at it.
Yes.
But in the end, there's a very thin line between compromise and being with people where they are, but where that line is a real problem.
Because presumably sometimes you do need to be very strict with people, and sometimes you need to be unbelievably gentle.
I just finished with a stupid story about me, which will encourage you. When we were in Australia years ago, there was an evening meeting, and I was feeling pretty fed up, and I didn't really want to do it, I have to be honest. And I was quite reluctant, and I got there quite late, and I went into the church, which was full of people, which was good, of course. Went up the front, and I said, well, I'm here, I'm ready if you want to start. And the lady said, well, actually, I just wanted to ask you, is it possible someone's just seen a man outside walking round and round the building, looking very depressed. You could just go and see if he's there and sort of encourage him to come in. So, believe it or not, I went out and spent 2 or 3 minutes walking round and round this church looking for the person who was depressed. I came back in, and the person organising the event said, oh no, I'm really sorry. The lady who saw this man has just told me it was you. It was me. I spent 2 or 3 minutes looking for myself in order to encourage myself to come in. It doesn't get much more stupider than that. So be encouraged.
Absolutely.
Do be encouraged.
And we'll speak to you next week.
See you next
and
week.
do keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.